America is rearming, and word is out. What's good for the Pentagon is good for America.
We have a view very different from many decision makers in the last administration that profit is not a dirty word.
Recession, hell, sell.
Profit's not a dirty word. It's the backbone of a free enterprise system.
Tonight on Frontline, the nation's largest employer shaping our industrial future, Pentagon Incorporated.
1940, 50, and 60 were beautiful because there were always conflicts or wars. That's the way it always will be. And they're sending troops over there. That's helping us out. Let them start something. You'll see, I'll be able to buy a house.
If we don't make them, somebody else will eventually.
I don't want to see anybody get hurt by them, but it's the only thing we got to do.
This truck carries promise. It carries the promise of more than 10 million contracts worth billions. As it crisscrosses the country, this truck is the Pentagon, spreading its wealth. Heading into places like Indianapolis, it represents a military budget of $238 billion this year, and the idea there's enough in it for everyone. Here, 1,200 hard-pressed businessmen and women from all over the state have come for a look at this Pentagon Roadshow. Come to hear just what Washington has to offer.
What's the name of
This is the Indiana Conference on Federal Procurement and Export Opportunities.
And politicians like Indiana's junior Senator Dan Quayle are only too happy to be cooperative.
It's not a bad phrase, but to say that this is just a fancy name for doing business with the federal government. That's a good word.
And on behalf of Dick Lugar and myself, it is my opportunity to welcome you to the Indiana Federal Procurement Conference, which I guess is just sort of a fancy phrase of how do you do business with the government. We're gratified in the last couple years in particular that Indiana has continued to move up the ladder in defense procurement and defense spending that comes into the state. The state now ranks 15th.
It's a lesson in building the modern defense consensus, creating support for a military budget of billions. You talk not of weapons, but of economics, and aim at an audience facing hard times.
The unemployment picture isn't too bright, and you have some pretty large industries throughout the state, especially in the northern part of Indiana. You know, our steel industry is hurting very badly.
A lot of people are coming here looking for, for help.
Actually, we're just looking for any business we can get from anywhere. It's practically a desperation situation.
On behalf of Secretary Weinberg, I want to welcome you to this conference. Don't be scared off by the size of this group or the number of counselors in the far rooms. You have to sort of look at this whole thing, as I often call an elephant, and you got to figure out how to eat this elephant. And you don't eat it all in one gobble, you take it apart, you do it by pieces, and you sort of look around the room and trying to determine who out there, who in that room buys what you produce today. And for many of you, it will be no one. But don't walk out yet, just stop and think. Now, what are these folks buying that I could produce?
Well, you need special uniforms for your
We might have a lot of material, bandoliers, that kind of stuff.
I can make them.
These sales fairs feature corporate contractors as well as every agency in the government.
The Air Force is over here, the Navy is here, the Army is right across.
But you quickly discover it's the military who has the contracts. The rest are here for show.
Her name is female.
Well, that's all right. I can target female as well.
That doesn't make any difference. Well, I'll give her your name.
encountering Secretary Lehman is like encountering a sunny day in May. If optimism can fuel a fleet, Mr. Lehman will have them running at 40 knots in no time. So here is no time, 40 knots, Secretary of Navy John Lehman.
Thanks, man. Every $1 billion of this defense spending generates 40,000 jobs in the area of its spending. For instance, the aircraft carriers in this year's 83 budget, $200 million will go directly into Indiana in just the aircraft carrier program, which is representative of the broad range of our programs.
This conference has two aspects. One is industrial companies that were in the forward portion of the conference, in another area of the conference, I should say, and the military portion. And I would say that all these information sheets or folders or directories or what have you are all from the military side, basically. And from the industrial side, if I can reach in here, this is what I have from the industrial side.
I'd like to think that I wouldn't politic for that aircraft carrier to be in existence solely for the reasons of my own pocket. But I doubt that I'm that pure.
We've seen a lot of people that I think within the next year we're probably going to be doing business with them.
The end of this year, we're not going to have Jimmy Carter's 460-ship Navy. You're going to have 514 ships in the Navy. As of last May, you don't have Jimmy Carter's 12 aircraft carriers. You have 13, and you're going to have 15 by 1989. We will have 600 ships by 1989. That's not in the great by and by. It is happening now, which is to the benefit of every one of you, and I strongly exhort you to come and do business with us. We need you. Thank you very much.
Even as the roadshow moves from town to town, using new money to lure new business, old businesses across the nation try to keep afloat. Here in Morton, Pennsylvania, is the kind of company that makes up what the Pentagon calls its mobilization base. It's Lansdowne Steel and Iron, a company that would be called on to keep the production lines rolling in the event of a next war. Lansdowne is the Navy's only source of certain artillery shells, a sole supplier. The company depends on the military. It answers to the military. And now the only people left out are the workers.
This is from one of the businesses that are supporting you. And don't forget this meeting on Sunday now. You're going to be there? Good. We're all going to be there. Come on. We're going to give them a fight.
We want to know what's happening around here.
Right.
The Pentagon has told Lansdowne to modernize and awarded $20 million in free equipment as incentive if the company moves to a new facility.
And don't forget the meeting on Sunday now.
Okay, thanks.
You're going to be there. You know
People fighting to keep their jobs is a story repeated across the country. But now there's a twist. A deep recession, combined with the largest weapons buying budget ever in peacetime, gives the Pentagon enormous power to affect lives.
You know, this company's been good to this area. And the people in this, area has been good to the company. It just don't make no sense to me.
What we say really won't matter because it's not going to get to them. They're not going to listen to us. They're going to move if they want to move. Whether,
they blame the problem
we
on
disagree
the
or not.
union. Why don't they take a look at themselves? And they got a lot of house cleaning to do.
Because that place is downright dirty and disgusting and ridiculous. And we need, the equipment is out of this world. You got presses running down there since, it's been built. Like, all right, the heat treat machine. It's a World War I model, And here we are, 3-4 generations later running the same machine.
Unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle. They can't get the contracts till they have the machinery. And they have to have a facility for the machinery.
You all are caught in the middle.
We're the bottom. We are the bottom of the line. We're just,
Someone who agrees with the employees' complaints is the man who's been brought in to turn the company around. Lansdowne's new president is David Stevens.
A bank will not talk to us.
and I've talked to many banks. They will not talk to us. But what we have is we've got $3 million of equipment assets that we have now. The government is going to give us $20 million of the most modern equipment available from a Ford shop.
Lansdowne was basically bankrupt when the military awarded its $20 million gift. Now, Stevens is trying to save the company by using Pentagon money as leverage to bargain with several communities.
And that $20 million asset base, for which we don't have to pay, plus the $3 million we have, gives us an effective asset base of $23 million, for which we can produce revenue and eventually employ 500 people.
But why did a bankrupt company receive such a generous gift?
I don't think that the people who were in decision-making authority at the various agencies that we dealt with when we were applying for the modernization grant really did a very thorough job of looking at the company, its management, and its facilities, etc. The top people from RADCOM, which is the research and development arm, facilities arm in Picatinny, New Jersey, and from the Rock Island facilities people in Illinois never really visited the plant.
Had anyone come, the problems would have been obvious. What is also obvious is that the deterioration here was allowed by Pentagon practice. Like 70% of the Pentagon's mobilization base, Lansdowne didn't have to compete for sole source contracts. It could fall apart without losing its customer. But in today's economy, even Lansdowne looks good, from a distance. It looks great in Hawkins County, Tennessee, one of the communities bidding for Lansdowne's Pentagon dowry and its promise of jobs. Unemployment here is 11%, and the town is desperate for any work.
Well, I've been to every plant around here, every store, like, you know, Kmart, big stores like that. I've been places like that. There just ain't no work nowhere.
I mean, I just did 4 years in the service, and I was around a lot of it.
Billy Austin questions the jobs Lansdowne might bring because of what he knows of other kinds of military work.
But the way my brother talks and the control levels they have, I don't think I'd work there. I mean, I'd rather wax cars and live to be an old man and have grandkids, you know.
Well, we're all for it. I mean, we think we've got a lot to offer as far as, you know, resources. We've got the climate. We've got the people to do the work here. We've got, you know, a good workforce here.
All I know is there's been a defense industry in Hawkins County my whole lifetime, and it's never really fluctuated that much. They seem to be basically recession-proof.
The wind is blowing for a boom right now. I believe that we are on a defense budget increase right now, and I think that we in Hawkins County would like to get some of that, and we think we have the facilities to provide what these defense industries need.
What Hawkins County has to offer is here, a site built with $1 billion of taxpayers' money and abandoned when the Tennessee Valley Authority was forced to trim its nuclear plans. Now, TVA is spending millions more to find businesses who'll take the sites off their hands. It's taxpayers' money chasing Lansdowne's taxpayers' money, as everyone from the state to the county joins in offering the company a deal.
I went up today with the state of Tennessee and TVA officials to make their proposals to the President of Lansdowne as what they could do to induce them to come here. TVA gave their proposal. They offered them a 10-year lease at a rate of $1.90 per square foot. They offered them $500,000 of interest-free loan money for 3 years. The state told them about the possibilities of grant monies and/or loan of $500,000 maximum.
If we offer them everything we have to offer, is there any further sweetening of the pot?
Unless we take up collection.
It's a very severe gamble for communities, and you really are between a rock and a hard place.
Back in Pennsylvania, Chris Vandervelde has the job of keeping Lansdowne in the county and offers this place, one of many empty factories in a troubled region. States used to fight over federal grants. Today, the coin of the realm is military money.
With the present administration's drive to put so much money of the federal dollar out to the economy via the Defense Department, it's clear that people who are concerned about an economy in a given region or about their business in a given area have to make an effort to go after some of that defense spending. And we've been cutting out social programs and service sector programs and other things that the federal government spent money on. I don't think it's designed as a public works program, but in essence it is the public works program. And in an economy as flat as ours, the defense spending has the potential of being the pump priming that will turn that economy around and start it moving again.
I know people that jump at the chance to go to work anywhere. They're just so hard up. They got a lot of kids they've got to raise, and they don't want to bring them up that way, you know. I know people that just jump at the chance to work anywhere.
I don't know. If times got hard enough and if I can't get into college, I might end up working there.
They just can't say, like, hey, we're going to up and go, and that's going to be it. They have to give us some notice.
They're playing with our lives.
I mean, they don't have to, but...
What'd you say?
They're playing with our lives. They really are. They're just, you know, just tearing us apart.
A company can affect the life of a community, too. And the smaller and poorer the place, the larger the impact. Raynell, West Virginia once hosted a military contractor, a company whose jobs were at first welcomed, according to the state senator who was the landlord.
Everybody around here, including myself, was so anxious to try to continue employment in this building and to keep people working around here that we would have virtually taken anything. Black, white, green, or yellow, you know. We would have tried it. And we was willing to try with them.
The building housed not hardware or shells, but a sewing factory owned by two New York brothers, Carl and Howard Thier. It's visited only occasionally now by the man who kept the machines running when 150 women sewed military clothing here. As he and others tell it, the company's gone because of how the women were treated. Low pay and arbitrary firings, replacing experienced sewers with beginners just for the money. Finally, things got so bad many women took a step they'd never taken before, called for a union. And the owners tried everything in their power to make sure there'd be no union as long as they were here.
I'll tell you what they done to me after they found out that I was for the union. They would send me back repairs that I had to do that I know that they weren't mine. And they done a lot of the girls that way. And then they would give our work to other girls and give us something else. Of course, they tried to keep us from making any money. And they would talk. We had one bundle woman was awful hateful. She talked to us awful hateful.
Would they sort of threaten you about your job and stuff like that?
Well, yeah, they said if the union went in, we would be without a job.
They, for instance, demanded at various times that we form a committee and try to get the employees to withdraw the union application, for instance. Well, that was bordering on criminal activity, quite frankly. There's laws against that in this country.
In its moves to escape, the company was guilty of 16 different labor law violations. But the Thiers still couldn't have left without help from the Pentagon, who not only let them transfer their major contract, but also gave them the extra time to finish it. By the time a judge ruled the company's labor practices illegal, it was too late. They'd left, contracts, jobs, and all, taking them over the mountains to two communities hidden in the hollows of East Tennessee, to Huntsville, the hometown of the majority leader of the U.S. Senate, and 40 miles down the road to Clinton. They're both in a right-to-work state, where there'd be less worry about unions, places that were happy to see the two brothers who came promising jobs. In Clinton, county bondholders were saddled with $1 million in a building that had sat empty for 3 years. The Thiers bought it for $325,000 and opened Lancer. They were given a good deal in Huntsville, too, by desperate town leaders stuck with the building abandoned by the last contractor there, who'd skipped town, leaving a pool of radioactive thorium waste behind for the town to clean up. The Thiers took the offer. The company's now Tenier. The Pentagon contracts kept coming. In the last 2 years, Tenier has garnered $71 million worth, enough to make the company far and away the largest employer in the town. But how much of that money stays in the community? And given the company's record, what about the jobs? Questions were met with silence. The owners refused to talk. The workers were afraid to. The doors were closed until former Cheniere employees explained what was happening.
They've told people not to talk to you. And I'd say that they would get fired. I don't know what, that they would, but it's just common knowledge that they would.
And I think they know that these people have to work, and they know that they'll take whatever they do to them because of their jobs and because of the fact that they have to work and they can't find jobs anywhere else.
I got 3 kids, and their daddy's not working, and I'm not either. It's rough. I'd work anywhere right now. I'd dig ditch as long as I get paid for it.
Although they are military contractors operating with taxpayers' money, these companies are no different than most apparel shops in the South. The women, as here at Lancer and Clinton, are paid minimum wage, with the promise of more for every piece they sew above a daily production level. The women call that daily rate their production. It is their only hope for making any money at all.
I had to walk, like, from here maybe to outside to carry my own work. And then I had to put 900 fronts and backs of sleeping bags together. And nobody that they'd had on that job before never got that much. Nobody never made the production. And I asked them, I said, would you get me a bundle person so they can carry my work? I said, I do believe I can get it then, because I was already up to 7-something. And he said, no, you can carry your own work and you can get 900 too. So they fired me, that's all.
Just like that?
Yeah.
Even though you're qualified, you're an experienced sewer, you can do more work, but you're never allowed to make more because they keep hiking the production. Each time you make it, they keep hiking it, fixing it to where you can't make anything.
When we were sewing the goose down sleeping bags, you could see the feathers flying around in the air. Like you could be sitting down in one end of the factory and you couldn't hardly see out the other.
They had 2 commodes for all of those women, and most of the time when you used the commode, you flushed it, the water would back up and come up through the water fountain. Come up into the water fountain, and it would overflow, run out in the floor, and there was times when you would go out there and maybe go a whole day that you couldn't even use the bathroom because it was out of order.
The Thiers are supposed to obey all regulations, but the endless contracts seem to give management the power to run their businesses the way they choose.
In government work, you're supposed to use, like, certain types of thread. They would put different types of thread on it. And when Clyde, he used to be the inspector, he'd come around, and they've had us to cut our thread off the machine and set it down on the floor and just set it our machines like we was working.
When Clyde would come in, he'd have to choose his own box. And when he'd get it, and they'd take it to this little room. And a certain party would take him for a coffee break, and they'd just switch boxes.
I watch that. I was in the back.
They made sure he got good bags to inspect. He just inspected so many, I think it was.
So they switched boxes?
Yeah, they switched the bags. It would be the same box because he'd pick it like the numbers were on it. They would just put different bags in it. The good bags, they would replace it.
So the workers were being told to do this?
Yeah.
Around here, there's just not all that much work for women. And so you either, if you need to work, you'll keep your mouth shut and sit there and work.
Pentagon contracts for clothing are awarded here by one of 5,000 employees. They choose among a steady stream of would-be contractors who come seeking their share of $1.4 billion in textile orders. The man who's repeatedly greeted the Thier brothers with contracts over the years approving their work is Bernard Johns. We asked Johns about the alleged tricking of the Pentagon's inspector at Cheniere.
That's a pretty strong allegation, and in all honesty, I have not heard any complaints of that nature, or I haven't received any information of that nature. That is definitely illegal under the terms of the contract.
Clothing and food and medicine and 1,000 other items contracted for the military end up in one of the 41 Pentagon warehouses across the country, waiting. Many of the boxes that arrive here bear a Thier Company name. In 1980, the output of all their factories made them the military's second largest clothing contractor. By the time the boxes get here, the goods inside have passed inspection at the plant. Tenier has just delivered $14 million worth of sleeping bags. And seeing the boxes raises inevitable questions. What's the quality of the goods inside? What has the taxpayer bought? A partial answer comes from a random inspection here at the end of the line. And as Bernard Johns admits, 15,000 sleeping bags from Tenier, more than 20% of the contract, were rejected for open seams. It's the kind of thing that can happen when a woman tries to sew 900 fronts and backs in a day. But because they passed the other inspection inside the factory, the company will pay no fine or penalty for these bags. It is not the first time there's been a problem from one of these companies, as the Pentagon's own internal papers prove.
A lot of the documents that I have seen, the correspondence from here, cite things like questionable integrity, borderline performance at best, no apparent production controls and guarantees. Does that fit with your knowledge of them?
I'd have to say yes, but I'd have to, I guess, condition my answer by saying that for firms that routinely deal in military clothing and textile contracts, it is not atypical for them to run into a cycle where everything goes wrong. They more or less have peaks and valleys in their performance records. Because if they run into a production problem on one particular contract, it may impact 3 or 4 that are waiting behind to go onto that one particular production line. Generally, on an overall performance basis, I'd have to say that these companies that we're discussing, Tenier, Lancer, and Greenbrier, have a satisfactory record of performance.
Requests to interview the Thiers to hear their answers to the charges, their side of the story, were refused. The companies are part of what's been called the Pentagon's Here to Eternity gravy train. They have a customer who at the least tolerates and at best rewards them for behavior which could put a commercial producer out of business. It's a customer who insulates them too, leaving them free to wield the power of their contracts as they wish. A few weeks ago, Tenier was awarded its largest contract ever, a contract for 400,000 new sleeping bags worth $31 million. The administration wants a military budget that totals $1.6 trillion over 5 years. Not counting Sundays, that's $1 billion a day pouring into the economy. Pouring into places you'd least expect. It's many millions of dollars in contracts to buy donuts for Army bases. It's hundreds of millions to develop lasers and robots. It's even $55 million in federal penitentiaries where prisoners do the military's work. It's money that involves people in every nook and cranny of the economy. If you count everyone with a stake, it's a military-industrial complex that seems infinitely extendable. It extends to industries like those along the highway outside Boston, known as the economic miracle of Route 128. They're a miracle of high-tech, hype, and hope for an electronic future based on silicon chips. But the recession has hit the electronics industry too, so that now, when it must develop the next generation of computers and chips to stay ahead, it's not only starved for capital, but for the talent to do so. For Route 128 extends beyond the highway which defines it. It depends on universities to train its scientists and engineers. In all this, the military assumes an increasing role. Pentagon support of university research grew by 42% in the last 2 years. Electronics is the fastest growing item in the budget. At MIT, as elsewhere, the graduates aren't drafted, they're hired.
Things are happening here, both on and off the job.
Defense contractors can swamp the competition as they court the university's young scientists and engineers. Military money lets them pay what it takes, bidding up the price for almost everything, including human resources. Even though what's advertised about the jobs doesn't much resemble one's notion of weapons research.
In a climate ideal for work and play, the opportunities for an exciting and rewarding future are all around at TRW.
Yes, you're talking about the nuclear area?
Already, the salaries of at least a third of the nation's scientists are paid by the military.
Which group is representing TRW Incorporated, but electronics and defense is the area of the company that we'll be concentrating on most today.
And TRW is typical. Military electronics is what's growing. That's where they'll put many of those they recruit.
All kinds of communications for all services.
Do most people have advanced degrees?
Effectively, it's a hard military.
It varies a lot on the area. In my department, 90% have advanced degrees.
In my position, it's sort of difficult to find jobs that aren't really defense related because it's almost non-existent, at least in computer science and electrical engineering.
I'd say out of 10 people going to work, 7 would end up on military projects. 70%, I would guess. Maybe higher.
A lot of people call it baby killing around here. It's looked on with some level of dismay. And originally, I remember when I was leaving high school, I was telling my girlfriend at that point that I would not do that kind of work. That it's not the kind of thing that I was interested in because its end result is death and destruction.
If you don't want to work on military systems, there are some commercial ones available. There are some NASA projects available, but they aren't that exciting, necessarily that exciting of work. It's not that technically challenging.
You're forced in certain circumstances to make, choices between, a career in things that you're interested in and the applications to which the work that you're doing is put.
That there's lots of military money pouring into the industry now, guiding those individual choices, worries companies like Analog that are dependent on the commercial marketplace to thrive. Analog's founder is Ray Stata.
We're in competition on 2 fronts. We're competing with the Russians militarily, and we're competing with the Japanese in economic and commercial sense. But as we're talking about here, we're using the same troops, namely our engineering workforce. There's only so many resources, and they're either going to develop the computer products to compete with the Japanese, or they're going to develop them to go into military applications. And I think that we're going to hit that dilemma and that trade-off head-on over the next several years.
The problem is that so many resources over the next 5, 6, 7 years are slated to go into military procurement, military R&D, military personnel in this country, just at a time when our economy is sputtering.
Robert Reich is a Boston economist who recognizes high tech is crucial to our industrial future.
We do need a new burst of capital. We do need to worry about human capital, education and training. We need to worry about marketing and competition if we're going to regain our competitive strength, if we're going to regain our momentum. But with all these resources going into military procurement and military R&D and military personnel, we're simply not going to have the resources we need to build up the commercial side of America.
An integrated circuit that can operate at unimaginable speeds is the key to automating war. Automatic electronic war is one the Pentagon plans for. A war with threats too swift for human reaction and control. The military wants a highly sophisticated computer chip to keep weapons firing and orders flowing even after a nuclear blast. A chip so hardened it will survive the heat and radiation. So they have funded an ambitious program. It would direct the new generation of computers and chips in this country toward military rather than commercial goals. The military's program is called VHSIC, VHSIC, for Very High-Speed Integrated Circuit. The millions in capital offered companies who sign up makes for long discussions and difficult decisions, even at Analog.
Our third largest customer asked us what we're doing about VHSIC and would we like to do something. I'd be a little bit afraid of all of our military customers starting to think twice about the seriousness of our dedication to that segment of the marketplace if we weren't participating in some form of the VHSIC program.
Bringing more electronic sophistication into these weapons is creating ripe opportunities for the application of our kind of technology.
We have to have special classification or secret areas and that sort of thing. If it was classified, the amount of rigmarole we have to go through is unbelievable, and it's not clear it's ever worth it.
Their dilemma lies in the difference between military and commercial work. The Pentagon imposes strict secrecy on research from the campus to the company lab and requires specialized systems too elaborate for commercial production.
Relative to all the other things we're working on, do we want to do it like that? Or do we want to develop fundamental technology for the commercial marketplace? And if the military uses it, that's fine.
It's not just a difference in goals, but a different way of doing business. Military products don't have to compete in price, so there are no incentives for a company to remain efficient, to turn discoveries into commercially viable products. That's perhaps the biggest concern for a company engaged in global economic competition.
What they're really saying is that we can't afford to do this ourselves by the government, and we want your precious resources and your management to do
We can afford
it.
the cash, but we don't have any people who work for us to do it.
That's right.
And the government's looking for us to divert a larger proportion of our resources to their kinds of problems.
That's correct.
And as opposed to those areas that in the short term serve the commercial base.
The reality companies like Analog face is a serious competitive threat from the Japanese, because Japan's government is subsidizing its next step in electronics. Japan funnels money to high tech through its Ministry of Trade and aims for commercial domination. We funnel just as much money through the Pentagon and aim for military might. It's a choice that leaves those who stay out of VHSIC, like Analog, short of capital.
We've seen it happen with the hi-fi equipment, with pocket calculators. We've seen that the Japanese can, in fact, be very competitive in the world markets, where they can, take business away from us. And it certainly, this will happen if we don't even have any products to compete with. It takes engineers to develop products, and if the engineers aren't working on those products, and the Japanese are, well, then it's predictable that they will be selling the computers to our companies rather than our selling the computers to their companies.
The real growth in the future is not going to be in military sales. It's going to be in commercial sales. Those are the markets in the world that we need to be concerned about, and those are the markets that will make or break our national economy.
In 1983, the military is our fastest growing manufacturing sector. And inside the Pentagon, there is concern over our industrial capabilities, a concern addressed at a recent meeting of military brass and prime contractors called the Manufacturing Technology Advisory Group. The meeting was opened by Air Force General Bernard Weiss.
I believe that one of the most important factors that have allowed the Japanese to achieve the productivity and quality increases that they've had is the MITI, the Ministry of Industry and Trade. To me, I look upon all of us here today and your organizations that you work for as the MITI that will take the United States out of the position it's in today in productivity and quality and move it back to being preeminent in this world that we live in.
If one expected at this meeting of military men to hear talk of weapons and the Soviet threat, what was overheard instead was talk of economic planning and the Japanese. A central fact about our modern Pentagon Incorporated becomes clear. Together, these men view themselves as our equivalent of Japan's MITI, setting the direction for our industrial future. They make up an economic apparatus every bit as rich and elaborate as MIDI. But it is the military here controlling the money, and the goals are set by military men.
General Scantz is a command pilot. He wears a Senior Missile Man badge. He has a Distinguished Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, and many other noteworthy awards. He has a very, very charming wife, and if you ever met her, Pat, and she can't be with us today, from Birmingham, Alabama, lovely 3 children. I can't introduce a man who is more an advocate of manufacturing technology and tech mod and business relationships than the man I'm about to introduce, General Larry Scantz. Larry?
All the armed services are here, but the Air Force has taken the lead. The head of its manufacturing command, General Scantz, faces an audience of contractors: Westinghouse and Rockwell, Boeing and Alcoa, General Electric, Grumman, Goodyear, telling them what their factories will look like.
Since our warfighting equipment comes from the industrial base, the condition within that base must be addressed and corrected. We now have an effort underway to provide a planning system that will guide our industrial base investments and will eventually integrate technology opportunity and business investment planning. It is a top-down approach we call industrial-based planning. We plan to maximize application of mechanization and automation, and we plan a paper-free factory with planning, scheduling, and control by the latest computer hardware and software techniques. We thus expect a factory that can perform at least 1 full shift per day unmanned.
A workerless factory raises questions about the future of work in this country. It means taking into account much more than costs and benefits on any one factory floor. But though there was much talk of the technicalities, there was little said of such social complexities among all the men gathered here.
At most of these meetings, the social questions are ignored, and even the dollar value attached to the social question is ignored. And
Brian Moriarty directs industrial automation experiments at a Massachusetts research lab, a lab with 90% funding from the Pentagon. He was one of the few who questioned the larger implications of his work.
I guess we're basically engineers, and as engineers, we deal with engineering problems. We're not social scientists, and we don't see ourselves like that. And we're probably very uncomfortable in dealing with social issues, in dealing with the idea of workers being displaced. We don't like to think about families on welfare, that kind of thing.
The factory worker, as we know it in our highly automated, highly sophisticated production lines, won't be there anymore.
You can't have a first-rate defense if you've got a second-rate economy.
The thing that you have to start doing as you define better the factory of the future is taking children out of high school and ensuring that they move into the skill areas that support the factory of the future.
If we're going to plan to be highly productive, that is the goal that we should seek. And it, in my opinion, is a concern that only the Defense Department is basically into increasing productivity.
The issue is critical. The issue is, are we willing to accept the erosion of the United States as a world economic power, or are we going to support the United States to be a major world power in year 2000 and beyond?
It's a question of who controls the resources, who makes the decisions, and how we ought to measure who gains and who loses. Every dollar that goes to the Pentagon, $238 billion for this year alone, must be approved here by those who represent us all. But as is often the case on Capitol Hill, when the key Senate committee meets to consider this year's military budget, it is the powerful who are heeded: the Pentagon, its contractors, and the lobbyists. The budget to be considered here represents thousands of deals and decisions made before they're ever presented to the Congress. decisions to buy $1.5 billion in clothing, to increase money for Visic, and to develop robots, to spend $29 billion in high tech. You will hear no mention of those decisions here. It is also a budget that will make down payments on scores of weapon systems, on the theory that once underway, any weapon is virtually impossible to stop. When yet another congressional district has a stake in a military contract, so does its congressman. So even though this is supposedly a meeting to cut $8 billion off what the Pentagon wants, you will hear little of cutting either. Instead, you hear motion after motion to put money back for a particular item contracted in the state of a particular senator.
Senator, want to make a motion to restore the $113 million and make it the authorized level?
I would like to bring it back to the authorized level.
That would make it 27 aircraft rather than 24.
They buy weapons that placate corporate contractors and their grassroots dependencies.
So moved.
Pork barrel politics plays into the Pentagon's hands as a shifting coalition of congressmen and constituencies put one weapon after another over the top.
And make a note that we've got to find $113 million.
It's rarely a debate of liberal versus conservative or guns versus butter. Instead, it's guns versus guns, in whose district. When Weicker of Connecticut gets what he wants, there's no need to stay around.
It has a much greater lift capacity. It will lift 24.
Johnston of Louisiana pushes for a helicopter advertised in its promotional brochure as perfect for the offshore oil industry, like the one in his state.
Join JBX. Yeah, and all I want to do is go up to the country. I urge the subcommittee to put that money we saved before in JBX. Oh, you did? Good. We've done that. Let's add more money. Oh, wonderful. Way to go.
But the helicopter's funding is already taken care of, even though Johnston missed it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Across the Capitol, in the House, pork barrel politics is carried to its extreme. The proposed amendment directs the Pentagon to spend money for items like clothing in communities with the highest unemployment. Though couched in terms of national defense, it's a fight between Frost Belt and Sun Belt. Who gets the dollars the government spends?
But we can never have a truly strong defense if significant areas of the country are afflicted with idle workers and machinery.
It's a debate that accepts the notion of the military budget as our most important economic tool, a notion upheld by many who are otherwise known as critics of the Pentagon.
I think that we're going to see a change in this Congress if we're not going to spread the defense spending around this country. Detroit, Michigan, they have the experience, they have the know-how. In the Second World War, all of you know that Detroit was called the arsenal of democracy. If we allow the automotive industries and related industries, whether they be metal, rubber, and countless other industries, to go under, we're going to weaken this country industrially, and if we do that, therefore, we've weakened this country militarily.
If we are going to make a social program out of military purchases, we should transfer it out of the defense budget and put it into the social welfare budget.
Our own Secretary of the Navy told the Maryland delegation that if we don't support this defense budget, then my shipyard workers better learn to whistle Dixie, because that's the only place the contracts are big.
I think what we're talking about is equity, fairness, saving our industrial base, sharing the wealth of one of the largest public works programs that this country is embarking upon, that of national defense.
The Congress examines barely 15% of the items proposed in any one Pentagon budget and argues about even less.
NOA is aye by
In fact, the budget considered today is not just money for 1 year, but obligations for years to come, obligations that will put 40% of the military spending beyond congressional control.
The Senator's amendment passes 8-7.
You want to talk on the MX? Have y'all got that information?
Wait a minute, I didn't vote myself. It's 8-8.
Their choreography of cooperation makes for uncritical funding of virtually every weapon or program proposed. And when there is a criticism that too much cutting is going on, the chairman makes clear what budget cutting is all about.
Again, we were cutting increased rate of growth. The attack helicopter, the increase over 82, all of these figures increase over 82. Attack helicopter is up $322.6 million.
The Patriot's up 17.3 million.
There are some questions that should be asked. Do we want the Pentagon to be our national public works program?
Two missiles, 176.5 million.
Should the Pentagon be our central economic planner? Do we or the Congress have a way of choosing? Do we any longer have a choice?
The AV-8B is 204 million. The F-18 fighter is 407 million, increased over 82. The E-2C is 82 million. The aircraft modifications for the Navy, 260 million. The Phoenix missile, 51 million. The missile mods for the Navy, 453 million. The two carriers, an increase for the Navy of 6.8 billion. 613 million for the KC tanker. Aircraft modifications for the Air Force, 333 million. MX funding is up to 447 million. Ballistic missile defense is up to 41 million.
We end this report with questions, and we end this report in Congress, where those questions about the Pentagon's role in our society finally must be addressed. For instance, only a few weeks ago, a heated exchange between Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger and Senator Donald Regal from Michigan.
By your really fanatical insistence on defense increases that are larger than needed, larger than we can afford, I believe that you're damaging our national security.
Well, Senator, I have to say,
Now,
I think
I beg your pardon, sir. I did not interrupt you.
That's right,
I did
but
not
you're
interrupt you. And when I finish, I have the floor.
I want to tell you that I think everything you've said is both insulting and wrong. I wonder if your people in Michigan with whom you've talked know that if you're going to impose the kinds of cuts you're talking about, you will lose something in the neighborhood of 154,000 jobs in your state. And I wonder how that.
How was Defense Secretary Weinberger's challenge answered? Senator Regal is in our Washington studios. Senator, how did you answer Secretary Weinberger about tying jobs to cuts in defense?
Well, first of all, in the state of Michigan today, we have over 750,000 people who are unemployed looking for work. So defense spending as such is not the answer in our state or in any of the 50 states. As a matter of fact, if you look at a study of how jobs are created, defense spending actually creates fewer jobs than almost any other way you can spend money, including leaving the money in the private economy where it's available for just its normal uses.
But Pentagon sources tell us that for every $1 billion cut in defense, 35,000 jobs are lost. That seems to be a powerful argument.
Well, not really, because you're taking that $1 billion out of other uses. For example, the private sector today, interest rates are very high, as you know, and that's caused a lot of the unemployment. So there are enormous distortions in the economy today because of the rapid buildup in defense spending increases. And it's not so much a matter of not having some level of increase, but this administration wants to increase at about 9–10% in terms of real growth in defense spending, and that is really more than we need and more than we can afford.
Can we really decrease the general overall economic dependence on military spending?
Yes, and I think we should. As a matter of fact, President Eisenhower, who was probably one of our outstanding military leaders in this century, warned against the military-industrial complex and about it becoming so dominant in terms of its effect on our economy that it could distort and hurt us in other ways. And I think that's now beginning to happen. We need a strong defense, but this group is going overboard, and we're going to have to scale down those increases to a more reasonable level so that the economy as a whole is more healthy, and that's very badly needed.
And this is going to be talked about more in Congress, I'm sure.
Well, yes, it is, although I think you'll find that there will be some, in effect, threats made by Secretary Weinberger to maybe withdraw contracts from a certain area, a certain state, if people are not willing to just blindly accept these massive increases. I hope the Congress will have the strength to stand up to that.
Senator Regal, thank you very much. And that is our report for this week.